Hello again everybody, and welcome back to another Decode Tech video. So this video is going to be a little bit different than most of my tutorial videos. It's going to be less of a teaching video and more of just an example with a little bit of explanation along the way. So the last couple of videos we've been talking about object-oriented programming and objects and the different concepts around it, and now this video is going to be like kind of bringing everything together and putting it all in one video to just kind of give you a sense of how it is to work with these objects in an actual program and to model some real-world objects. So if you find this useful and like this style of video, please give the video a thumbs up or leave in the comments down below a comment letting me know what you thought. That way I can know if this type of thing is useful for you in the future. Alright, so let's go into VS Code, and we've been talking about making a cup of coffee. So we've made a mug class and a coffee maker class, and I've been kind of assuming in the whole coffee maker thing that it was the new Keurig style of coffee maker. But I thought it would make it a little bit more interesting of an example if we would use the old style coffee maker with a coffee pot. And I thought it would be helpful if I would rewrite the classes we have here just to refresh in our minds what's doing what. And since I'm now bringing in another class, it might be nicer if I design them with a coffee pot object in mind. So I'm going to take everything out of this main file except for my main function where the logic of my program will go. And I'm just going to save that. And I'm going to open back up my sidebar with Control B on Windows and Command B on Mac. And I'm going to add some more files. You could easily just put this all in one file probably, but it'll help us reiterate our knowledge about modules, and it'll help you to be able to see the classes on one screen better, and it won't be confusing with all the scrolling up and down. So I'm going to create a file. Let's start off by making our coffee pot object. So let's call this pot.py. And we know that to create an object, we need a class, which is like the blueprint. So I'm going to start off by saying class, the name of my class, which I'll call coffee pot. And I'm using the camel case convention where you uppercase the first letter of each word. And I'm not going to be inheriting, so I'm just going to put a colon. And then I'm going to go ahead and make my init function, which takes double underscores because it's a special method. And it always takes self as the first parameter. And that's actually all I'm going to take in for my coffee pot in the initialization. So first of all, we're starting off with the attributes that we want our coffee pot to have, which remember are just variables describing the object we're working with. And they start with self so that we can work with different instances of a coffee pot object. So I'm going to say self.isFull because we'll probably want to be able to see if the pot is full or not. And I'm just going to set it to the boolean false. I also want to see what the current level is. So I'm going to say self.level gets 0 initially when the object's created. And then we also want a max level to be able to see if it's full or not. So we'll say self.maxLevel. And I'll set that equal to 12. I think a standard pot of coffee can hold 12 cups. And then we also might want to be able to see what it contains. For example, what kind of coffee is it going to be holding after the coffee's brewed. So I'll say self.contents, and I'll just set that to an empty string for now. Remember, all these attributes have to be some kind of Python data type. So whether it be a data type that we created, or a string, integer, float, boolean, list, dictionary, or any other built-in type. All right, so I'm just going to leave the attributes at that, and let's start making some methods or some actions we can do with or on this object. And remember, these are really just functions, so we'll start off with def and the name of the function. So we want to be able to fill this coffee pot. So I'll say fill, and we'll take in self, and we'll take in the level, how much we want to fill it. Of course, the function needs a colon at the end for the block of code. I'm going to say if not self.isFull. So in other words, if self.isFull is true, if not self.isFull is true. And we also want to check whether the level coming in, if they want to fill it up 8 ounces and it's a 6-ounce cup, obviously that's going to overflow it. Or if it already has 2 ounces in it and it's a 6-ounce cup and they want to add more than 4 ounces, that would overflow it as well. So we want to check if and self.level, so whatever it currently is, plus the level they're filling it up, is less than or equal to self.maxLevel. And notice I put these in parentheses here just to make sure this happens before the comparison here happens. I believe that probably would happen first anyway, but in either case, this is really clear to the programmer that, hey, this is going to happen first. Now, how do we want to simulate filling the pot? We'll just say self.level plus equals for incrementing, and we'll increment it by the level. I think that'll do it for that method. Let's go ahead and create another one. So we'll start with def again, and we'll say fill mug because we want to be able to fill a coffee mug from this pot. And of course, we'll take in self again, and we'll take in the mug that we're going to fill. Now I'm just going to return mug.fill. Now, Mug is going to be a object. So I know that mug itself has attributes and methods that you can access with a dot. So I can say mug.fill. We haven't made the mug with the fill method yet, but we're going to. And notice I didn't say self.mug because we don't have any mug attribute here. It doesn't really make logical sense for a coffee pot to have a mug tied to it. Normally, no coffee pot has a specific mug associated with it. So we're just going to say mug.fill, and we haven't made this yet, but we want to be able to say, or track rather, which pot is filling up the cup. So I'm going to pass in self and nothing else. Now I know that looks a little weird, but it's just taking this coffee pot object or instance of this object, passing the whole thing into the fill method on mug. Hopefully that'll make more sense in a bit. Let's make another method and let's call it getContents. Take in self, and that's it. And we'll just simply return a string. And I'm going to format this string with fstrings. And I'm going to say pot contains, now put in a placeholder, and I'll say self.contents. We'll define another method called getLevel. Take in self, and we'll say return another fstring. Pot level is placeholder self.level, and this level is in ounces, so hard-coded in the string, I'll put ounces right after the level, and then full. So it'd be something like pot level is 6 ounces full. All right, so we'll save that and we'll be done with that for now. Now let's go ahead and create our coffee maker. So I'm going to come back over to my folder, hit new file, and I'm going to call it maker.py. And I'm going to create another class. I'm going to call it coffee maker. Not going to inherit from anything. And I'm going to make a class variable of max water level. And I'm going to set it equal to 12. That way we never overfill our coffee pot, which holds 12 cups. And I'm going to make the init function again, take in self, and I'm also going to take in the kind of beans that are put into it to brew the pot of coffee. I'm going to say self.cupsizes. You know what? I actually don't need that anymore because we're not doing the Keurig style of coffee maker. I'm just going to take in self.water level, and I'll set that equal to 0. And now I'll say self.pot. So it makes sense for a coffee pot to be associated with a coffee maker because a coffee maker comes with a coffee pot. And this is going to be a coffee pot object. So this is a little bit new. It's just like creating any other coffee pot. It's just like creating any other object, but a attribute of coffee maker is going to be another object. Now we need to import that from our pot.py. So up at the top, I'll say I'll say from pot import coffee pot. Now we have access to create that coffee pot object. And our coffee maker will also have an attribute called self.brewing, and we'll set that to false by default. And we'll say self.beans gets whatever is passed in when a coffee maker object is created. Now we might want to be able to add water to our coffee maker. So I'll say add water, take in self and the amount of water, and I'll just print out adding water, ... to make it look like some action is currently in progress. And I'll say if amount is less than coffee maker dot max water level. So we're accessing the class's variable max water level, not the instance. Then I'll say self dot water level plus equals the amount passed in. And then at the end, I'm just going to return self dot get underscore water level. Now I didn't define get water level yet, so let's do that now. I'll say def get water level, take in self, and I'll simply return an f string again. And I'll say coffee maker has placeholder self dot water level. Once again, I'll just hard code ounces beside it of water. And lastly, let's make it so we can brew something. So let's say def brew, take in self. Now let's say print brewing pot, ... Let's say self.pot. So now we're accessing the pot attribute, which in itself is another object, which means it has attributes and methods. So we can use the dot operator again, and we can fill up that pot because we have a fill method over here in our pot class. And that method is taking care of seeing whether it's already full and if the level we're trying to fill it up would overflow it. So we don't have to check for that in the brew method. But fill does take in the amount we want to fill it, so the level. So I have to pass in a level, and I'll just pass in self, so this is referring to the coffee maker, dot water level. So however much water they put in the coffee maker, it'll fill the pot up with that much coffee. And now I'll say self.pot.contents. So in other words, let's make the contents of the pot whatever the beans were that were passed into the coffee maker, which is self.beans, not self.pot.beans, because that would be the coffee pot's beans, which we didn't even make an attribute for pot called beans, so that would fail. But we're accessing self, which is just this coffee maker dot beans. And then we're setting that to the attribute contents of the pot object. Takes a little bit to think through all this, but hopefully that makes sense. And we'll save that. All right, and lastly, we need to make a coffee mug to be able to fill up. So once again, let's make a new file. Let's call it mug.py, and let's call it class coffee mug. Once again, not inheriting anything, so we don't need the parentheses. And we'll use an init function, take in self, and we'll take in the color of the mug and the size of the mug. And you could really go in depth as you want as far as the attributes and the methods with these different objects. Like you could do way more than I'm doing here. I just wanted a fairly simple example, but yet actually shows you some decent functionality. So let's take in the sizes of the cups. Like let's have different options of sizes a cup can have. Now this would probably make more sense to be a class variable since all mugs will be able to have one of these sizes. But a mug will only have one size at a time. So I'll show you what that looks like. Let's say sizes gets, and I'm going to use a dictionary, and we'll say the keys will be the nice human readable form of a size like small, and then we'll make the value be integers holding the fluid ounces. So we'll say 6 ounces for a small. Let's make a medium. Let's make that a regular 8-ounce cup. And let's make a large, and we'll make that a 10-ounce mug. And now each instance will have a size, and we'll assign that to not just whatever the user puts in as size, but we want to access one of the class sizes. So if we want to access a class variable, we have to say the name of the class. So coffee mug dot sizes. And then remember with dictionaries, you can use square brackets right after it, much like index notation, except for instead of putting an index in, like you would for a list, you put the key in. And we want to get the key from whatever the user passes. So we'll say size. So that's coming from right here. And the reason I did that is because I thought it would be more intuitive when you're creating a coffee mug to just be able to pass in the string of small, and it'll automatically set the size attribute to be 6. All right, let's set the color with self.color, and we'll just pass that, or we'll just assign that to the color that's passed in. Let's see how full the cup is with a how full, and we'll set that equal to 0 by default. And we also might want to see what the contents are with self.contents. Gets an empty string. All right, I think that's enough attributes. Let's start adding some methods. So I'll define a function inside this class, and I'll see is full, and I'll just take in self, and I'll just simply return self.howFull equals self.size. And what that'll do by returning an expression like that is that expression either evaluates to true or false. So if howFull equals size, that means the cup is full. So if that's true, it'll return true, else it'll return false. Kind of a little shortcut trick there. And let's define another method called fill, and we'll take in self and source. Now the source is going to be a coffee pot in our case, but you can fill a cup up with something other than a coffee pot, so I thought maybe a more generic name like source would make more sense. But for our example, you can think of it as coffee pot. And I'm going to say that while not self.isFull, so we're using the method we just defined up above, and source, so and pot.level is greater than 0, so while the pot's not empty, we're going to say self.howFull plus equals 1. And then we'll deplete the pot one level at a time by doing source.level minus equals 1. So we're decrementing the pot's level. And it'll do that until the cup's full, and it'll increase the cup one level at a time. So filling the cup up one level at a time and decreasing the pot's level one level at a time. And then outside of the while loop, I'll say self.contents. So in other words, the cup instance contents, it's going to get assigned to source, which once again is our coffee pot, source.contents. Remember, in our coffee pot, we made contents attribute as well, and that is coming from our coffee pot. When we brew, we're passing in, or we're assigning the pot's contents to the beans, which were passed into the coffee maker. Now I know that's a little bit of a juggling there, but hopefully you can follow that. So let's go back to the mug, and we just set its contents, and now at the very end, let's just return the mug, which is just self. All right, let's save that, and let's go back to our main file and actually start using some of these classes. First of all, I'm going to get some more space by getting rid of the sidebar. Now, to be able to work with our classes, we have to import them. So I'm going to import, I want to use a from rather. So from maker, let's import coffee maker. Now, coffee maker has a coffee pot in an attribute. So we don't have to import coffee pot because coffee pot is already imported at the top of the maker file. But we do need access to the mug. So from mug, import coffee mug. Now in our main file, we can use our actual logic of the program by creating some instances of these objects. Because these files are just holding the blueprints of these classes, but now we're going to actually create some instances. So let's make a coffee maker. I'm going to make a variable called maker, and I'm going to assign it to a coffee maker object. And remember, you need the parentheses after it. And coffee maker, does it take in anything in the initialization function? Yes, it takes in beans. Remember, self gets passed automatically. So what type of coffee do we want to make? Let's put in some dark Colombian coffee. So now maker is a coffee maker object. And let's print maker.getWaterLevel. And that's a method, so we need parentheses. And then let's try to run a method on it. So let's say maker.addWater. And does add water take in anything? Add water takes in an amount of water to add. So let's fill it up by 8 ounces. And now, does that function return anything that we might be interested in? So let's go to add water. It returns the water level. So instead of, again, having to say print maker.getWaterLevel, I can simply print this line out because it evaluates to whatever the current water level is. So let's just save and run that so far. And we have to run our main file because that's where our objects are actually getting created. So we'll say python main.py, and you see we get coffee maker has 0 ounces of water. It's adding water, and it says coffee maker has 8 ounces of water. All right, now that we got some water, let's actually brew a pot. So I'm gonna say maker.brew. Remember, we made a brew function, and I don't believe that takes any arguments, but I'll double check. And sure enough, it just takes self, which will get passed automatically. Now let's see if our pot got filled up. Now remember, our pot is an attribute of maker. So we have to say maker.pot. Now pot is holding a coffee pot instance. And so since pot is a coffee pot object, it also has attributes and methods that we could call. And let's get the level of that pot. So I'll call getLevel, and that's method, so it needs parentheses. And now does that return anything interesting? Well, let's look. Let's go into pot.py, getLevel. And sure enough, it returns what the level is. So let's print that out. So I'm going to say print, and surround that in parentheses, the pot level. Now let's save and run that again. So I'll run that, and you see we get also brewing pot, and pot level is 8 ounces full. Now let's check to see what's actually in our pot. So let's say print maker.pot, because we want the pot contents, and get contents. And I think you know by now where that's coming from. And we can assume that there was a returned value from the get contents because I'm printing it out. And let's see what the contents look like. So I cleared the terminal and let's run it again. Now you see the pot contains dark Colombian coffee. All right, so let's make a coffee mug to put this in. So let's make a new variable called mug and let's assign it to a coffee mug object. And to instantiate it, we need the parentheses. And does it take in anything in the initialization? And sure enough, it takes in a color and a size. So let's make it a blue mug. And let's make it the size of small. And of course, behind the scenes, it actually makes the attribute store the integer 6 because the key small is related to the value of 6. If we go back to mug.py, small is equal to 6. So now let's print out our mug object. So I'm just going to say print mug. I'm going to save, and I'm going to clear the terminal and run. And you see we get a coffee mug object. Now that's good that we got a coffee mug object, but it'd be more useful to see like what that mug was actually storing. So let's go back to mug.py, and there's more special methods besides the init method. And one of them is called double underscore. Remember, all the special methods and variables start with double underscore. str, which stands for string representation, I think. And then we'll just take in self. And you can Google more special methods you can manipulate with a class, but I'm not going to go over all of them now. And now we'll just give it a string that we want to print out when we try to print out the object. So I'm going to return an f string again, and I'm going to say self.color. Then I'm going to say cup width. So it'll be like blue cup width. And then I'll say how full it is, self.howfull. And that's going to be in ounces of whatever it's holding. So we'll put a placeholder in and say self.contents. Now if I save that, and I'll go back to main.py just so you can see it again, see what we're doing. And then I'll run python main.py again. And now instead of getting a weird cup object, we get blue cup with 0 ounces of blank. So the reason it's blank is because if you go in mug.py, the contents is blank by default. But now let's go back to main.py and let's actually fill this mug up with something. So we'll say maker.pot, because we need to use the pot to fill the mug, .fill mug. And now does fill mug take in something? Well, it probably takes in the mug. Actually, their IntelliSense says mug. So what mug do we want to fill? Well, our mug variable that we just made up here. And does that return anything? Let's go check. So look for the fill mug method, and it returns mug.fill. Now, does mug.fill return anything? So we'll go into mug, and mug.fill returns self. So this is actually like printing out mug, because it's like returning the actual mug instance, which would be this mug here. So it's like we just did when we said print mug. So it's returning that mug object. So what I can do is just surround this with print because it's returning that mug. So now let's run that, and hopefully we actually get some contents in it this time. And sure enough, now it returned that mug. It says blue cup with 6 ounces of dark Colombian coffee. Now let's check if it actually emptied our coffee pot, because obviously if you use the pot to fill a cup, it should bring the cup's level down. Sorry, the pot's level down. So let's go on the next line and let's print maker.pot, because we want to get access to that pot object, and get level. And we're going to print that out because I believe that returns the level. So I'll run the program again. And now you see it says pot level is 2 ounces full. So when we brewed the pot, it was brewed to 8 ounces full. So when we poured the 6 ounces into the coffee cup, there should be 2 ounces left. So that's correct. And one last thing we could do is we might want to be able to print out what the pot is. So maker.pot would just be like printing mug, because pot is a pot object. So if we do that, we should get another weird looking pot object thing like we did with our coffee mug. Yeah, there it says coffee pot object at a certain memory address. So all we have to do to fix that is go back to our pot class and define that double_str method. And I'll take in self, and to represent what a pot should be, we'll just use another format string and say pot has placeholder self.level, and that'll be in ounces of self.contents. And I'll save that. And now all I have to do is rerun the code. And now we get pot has 2 ounces of dark Colombian coffee. So we did have the get contents and get level methods that we could get this information, but this str method now gives us both that information with one command. All right, so that's going to do it for the tutorial. Hopefully that made sense. If it didn't, feel free to go back and check out my previous tutorials on object-oriented programming. I believe I covered pretty much all the topics that I covered here. And I just wanted to show you how you could take these different objects and make them work together and actually model how things would look in the real world. I know this can take a little bit to sink in, but what you really need to do is practice working with objects and even objects inside of objects, and eventually it should start to click. But don't get frustrated if this doesn't come right away. So if you have any questions, you can leave them in the comments section down below. Please subscribe if you didn't already. It really helps the channel out and I really appreciate it. Please give the video a thumbs up. And if you have the means and want to support the channel, you can go to patreon.com/decodetech. Otherwise, we'll see you in the next video.